She laughed and said it like it was a joke. "He's a failure. That's why I pay for gas." That was the moment everything inside me went quiet. No anger, no shock, just clarity. We were standing in a rooftop bar downtown, surrounded by her co-workers and executives from her company, and my fiancée had just turned my entire life into a punchline. She expected me to laugh along, maybe look embarrassed, maybe shrink. Instead, I smiled, took a sip of my drink, and decided I would deal with it, just not the way she thought. I'm Daniel. I was 34 at the time, and I worked in logistics and fleet optimization for a regional distribution company. Not flashy, not glamorous, but stable, technical, and very real. My fiancée, Lauren, was 32, a rising star in corporate marketing, the kind of woman who collected LinkedIn endorsements like trophies. When we met 4 years earlier, she told me she admired how grounded I was. She said I felt safe. Back then, she meant it as a compliment. In the beginning, our relationship felt balanced. We split expenses, took turns planning dates, and talked about building something together. I supported her through late nights, presentations, and job transitions. When she landed her current role at a fast-growing energy startup, I celebrated her harder than anyone else. I believed partnerships weren't about competition. They were about teamwork. If one person surged ahead for a while, the other held the ground. But once her salary jumped and her title changed, so did her tone. It started subtly, little comments disguised as jokes. "Must be nice to clock out at 5. You wouldn't get it. It's more of an executive thing." I brushed them off, told myself she was stressed, adjusting to pressure. Meanwhile, I quietly picked up more at home, errands, planning, logistics, because I thought that was what support looked like. Then came the dinners. Company events where partners were invited, but only as accessories. Lauren introduced me with a smile that never reached her eyes. "This is Daniel," she'd say, pausing just long enough to let people wonder. No mention of my work, no context. I watched how she lit up when talking about her peers, how she leaned into their praise, and how she subtly stepped away from me, like proximity alone might lower her status. The night it all snapped was supposed to be a celebration. Lauren's company had just closed a major partnership, and her team invited executives, investors, and senior managers to a private rooftop bar. Lauren insisted I come. "It'll look good," she said. "Not we'll have fun, not I want you there. Just that it would look good. I should have paid attention to that wording." At first, everything felt normal. Drinks flowed, people laughed, and Lauren was in her element, confident, magnetic, speaking in buzzwords and polished anecdotes. I stayed slightly behind her, nodding, listening, letting her shine. I was used to that role by then, but as the night went on, and the alcohol loosened tongues, the jokes started getting sharper. One of her bosses, a senior director named Evan, asked casually, "So, Daniel, what do you do?" Before I could answer, Lauren laughed and waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, he works in logistics. Nothing too exciting." People chuckled politely. I smiled, even though my jaw tightened. Evan raised an eyebrow and said, "Hey, logistics runs the world." Lauren rolled her eyes and added, "Sure, but not the kind that pays for much." Then came the line. Another executive joked about gas prices, and Lauren, already tipsy, leaned into him and said loudly, "Well, I don't worry about it. He's a failure. That's why I pay for gas." There it was, loud enough for the whole group. A few awkward laughs. Someone coughed. Evan looked uncomfortable. Lauren beamed, clearly proud of herself, like she'd just landed a perfect punchline. I felt heat crawl up my neck, but I didn't react. I didn't defend myself. I didn't storm out. I simply took a slow sip of my drink and smiled. Inside, something fundamental shifted. That comment didn't just humiliate me, it revealed exactly how she saw me. Not as a partner, not as an equal, but as a liability she tolerated while it suited her image. And in that moment, I stopped seeing her as my future. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Lauren didn't notice the distance that settled between us. She was too busy soaking up attention. On the ride home, she laughed about the evening like it was a win. "You were so quiet," she said. "You should loosen up around my bosses." I nodded, said nothing, and stared out the window while she scrolled through photos and messages, reliving the applause. At home, she kicked off her heels and collapsed onto the couch. "You know I was joking, right?" she said, finally looking at me. "They all know how much I make. It's just funny." I asked her calmly if she truly believed what she said. She shrugged. "I mean, compared to me? Yeah. But that's not a bad thing. Someone has to be average." That word, average, landed heavier than the joke ever did. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to her breathe, replaying every moment I'd dismissed over the past year. The comments, the eye rolls, the way she'd started paying for things publicly but reminding me privately. The subtle reframing of our relationship into a hierarchy where she sat comfortably on top. By morning, I wasn't angry anymore. I was methodical. I didn't confront her again. I didn't argue or demand an apology. Instead, I went to work and did what I always did when something didn't add up. I reviewed the numbers. Lauren loved telling people she paid for everything, but the truth was more complicated. We had joint accounts, shared credit cards, and a carefully structured agreement we'd signed when we got engaged, something she'd brushed off as boring paperwork. That agreement included a clause about contributions, financial and otherwise. It spelled out how assets, debts, and reimbursements would be handled if the engagement ended. At the time, Lauren had laughed and said, "You're so cautious." She'd signed without reading. As I pulled up the document on my computer, I realized just how expensive that confidence was about to become. Over the next few days, I became a ghost in my own home. I was polite, calm, distant. Lauren mistook my silence for submission. She doubled down on her new persona, ordering takeout without asking me, Venmo, requesting me for my half of things she insisted on buying, loudly telling friends on speakerphone how exhausting it was to carry someone financially. Every word just confirmed I was doing the right thing by not reacting. While she was busy performing superiority, I was quietly gathering information. I pulled bank statements, credit card histories, and transaction logs from the past 18 months. Patterns emerged immediately. Despite her public claims, a significant portion of our shared expenses had come from my accounts, utilities, insurance, even repairs on her car. What she paid for loudly was often discretionary. What I paid for silently kept our life running. Then I checked the engagement fund. That was the account we'd set aside for the wedding and future house. I had contributed a lump sum early on from a performance bonus. Lauren's contributions were smaller but more frequent, until about 6 months earlier. After that, her deposits stopped almost entirely, replaced by withdrawals. Venue research, dress consultations, trips she labeled as inspiration, all of it coming from money she later claimed wasn't hers. I also noticed something else, payments I didn't recognize at all. A luxury co-working space, high-end restaurants during work hours, rideshare charges late at night, nowhere near her office or our apartment. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they told a story, and it wasn't one of professional ambition. That's when I stopped just reviewing finances and started documenting behavior. Screenshots, dates, times, cross-references. I didn't accuse her of anything. I didn't need to, not yet. I was building a timeline, and every entry pointed to the same conclusion. While she was busy calling me a failure in public, she was quietly relying on my structure, my stability, and my money to prop up the life she bragged about. The confrontation didn't happen the way people expect. There was no shouting match, no dramatic reveal at the dinner table. Instead, Lauren cornered me. A week after the rooftop incident, she sat across from me with her arms crossed and that practiced corporate smile. "You've been acting weird," she said. "Distant. If you're insecure about the joke, just say that." I looked at her and realized she genuinely believed the problem was my ego, not her cruelty. I told her I wasn't insecure. I was observant. That confused her. She tilted her head and said, "About what?" I didn't answer directly. I asked her if she was happy. She launched into a speech about ambition, standards, and how relationships sometimes need to evolve. Then she said something that sealed everything. "I can't keep shrinking myself to make you feel better." She said it like a slogan she'd practiced. That night, after she went to bed, I checked something I'd been avoiding. Her email. We shared a tablet at home, synced for convenience. I didn't go digging randomly, I searched for one phrase, the name of the co-working space from the transactions. What came up wasn't subtle. Long email chains. Calendar invites marked private, receipts forwarded to herself with notes like expense later, and one message that made my chest tighten. I can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore. The sender wasn't a colleague I recognized. It was Marcus, one of the senior managers from her company, the same man who'd laughed at her gas joke on the rooftop. Suddenly, the late-night rides made sense, the fancy lunches, the confidence. She wasn't just climbing the corporate ladder, she was climbing him, and she was using our shared finances as a cushion while she planned an exit where she looked like the winner. That was when I stopped seeing myself as the embarrassed fiancé and started seeing myself as what I actually was, someone with leverage. Lauren thought power came from a bigger paycheck and a louder voice. She forgot that contracts don't care about titles and documentation doesn't forget insult. She told me to deal with it, and at that moment I knew exactly how. I didn't confront her about Marcus. I didn't need to. Instead, I scheduled a meeting with my lawyer. I brought everything: the engagement agreement, the financial records, the emails, the timeline. He didn't interrupt while I explained. When I finished, he leaned back, folded his hands, and said, "She thinks she's untouchable." Then he smiled slightly. "She's not." That was the first time I felt something close to relief. Here's what Lauren never understood. That agreement she signed wasn't symbolic. It had teeth. Any funds taken from our joint accounts for non-mutual purposes, any financial misconduct tied to infidelity, and any reputational harm that could be directly linked to misuse of shared assets triggered reimbursement clauses. Not maybe. Not if a judge feels like it. Automatically. With interest. My lawyer explained it in numbers, and the total made my stomach drop, not because it was small, but because she clearly had no idea what she'd risked. While my lawyer prepared the formal notice, I quietly separated myself. I moved my personal belongings into storage, redirected my direct deposit, canceled shared subscriptions. Lauren barely noticed. She was busy. Late nights, strategy sessions, sudden business trips. She assumed I was sulking. She assumed I'd eventually apologize. That assumption was the most expensive one she'd ever make. The notice was delivered on a Friday afternoon. Not by me. By courier. When she opened it, she called me immediately, 6 times in a row. I didn't answer. Then came the texts. "What is this?" "This is insane." "You're trying to ruin me." Finally. "We need to talk now." I waited until the next morning before responding with a single line. "I'm dealing with." When we finally sat down face to face, Lauren didn't look powerful anymore. She looked scared. She tried to laugh it off, called it aggressive accounting, said everyone did this. I calmly explained that I wasn't everyone. I was the person she humiliated in front of her bosses. I reminded her gently of the rooftop bar, of her words, of how confidently she'd declared she paid for gas because I was a failure. Her face went pale as she realized that joke had just rewritten her future. Lauren's first move was denial. She insisted the agreement was outdated, that no judge would enforce something so technical. My lawyer didn't argue with her feelings. He responded with facts, screenshots, bank statements, emails. The timeline of her relationship with Marcus aligned perfectly with the unexplained expenses. Her public humiliation of me wasn't just cruel, it established it. By the end of that meeting, she wasn't posturing anymore. She was bargaining. Then came the fallout she never predicted. As part of the reimbursement process, her company's compliance team was notified, not out of spite, but because shared corporate expenses had been mixed with personal spending during an undisclosed relationship with a senior manager. HR doesn't care about romance. They care about liability. Marcus was placed on leave. Lauren was asked to explain herself. Suddenly, the people who laughed at her joke weren't laughing anymore. The engagement ended quietly. No social media drama. No long posts about choosing myself. Just paperwork and consequence. She moved out within 2 weeks. The reimbursement hit my account a month later. Every dollar she'd taken, plus interest. The woman who once mocked my salary now couldn't afford her own apartment without a roommate, and the irony wasn't lost on either of us. A few months later, my life looked nothing like it had before. I took a senior role at work, one that didn't require bragging or posturing. I slept better. I laughed more. I met someone new organically, someone who didn't measure worth by titles or gas receipts. Meanwhile, Lauren's career stalled, not because I sabotaged her, but because arrogance has a shelf life, and everyone eventually sees what it costs. Looking back, I'm grateful she said it out loud. He's a failure. That's why I pay for gas. Those words freed me. They showed me exactly who she was, and exactly what I needed to do. She told me to deal with it, and I did. Calmly. Precisely. And in the end, the only thing that failed was her belief that respect was optional.